Hey everybody, this is Polly Raven, and I'm back, and I want to talk to you today about the least appreciated, let me put it this way, the most underappreciated tank of World War II, perhaps. And I feel that you're looking at her right here. This is the M4 Sherman tank. And this was initially deployed in 1942, and you know, I've heard howls about its design and how inadequate it was and what a piece of crap, and what were the Americans thinking. And you know, when I was a kid, all the American documentaries I saw made it look like a piece of shit. Well, hell, you know, it couldn't penetrate a Panther tank from the front, you know, at 100 or 200 meters or whatever, you know. And I always thought, oh man, those, you know, freaking American engineers, why couldn't they figure out something better? Why were the Germans so superior? Well, you're comparing apples and oranges, I've learned. Really, when you think about it, in many respects, just the most obvious one, the Sherman tank was between 33 and 42 short tons compared to the 49 short tons of a Panther tank. So right away, off the top, you know you're comparing a medium tank against a heavy tank, which is blatantly unfair. The production time that these two vehicles were required were completely different. As Stalin once said, quantity has a quality all of its own, and you know, obviously the Allies won World War II, and I agree with that. It's quite obvious you can't always put all of your effort into quality, and that in the end could bury you, as Hitler saw, you know, experienced for himself. But there's actually something else much more interesting going on here, and until I've discovered one interesting statistic, I continued to believe the Sherman was a piece of shit. And so I'm going to share with you now one of the most interesting facts about the Sherman that I ever learned. Let's take a closer look at this barrel here. This is a low velocity 75mm barrel. Why on the God's green earth would they put a low velocity 75mm barrel on this thing? Well, the Germans also had low velocity 75mm barrels. What were they on? They were on the Stugs, right? The Stugs that were designed for infantry support roles, because when you want to be supporting infantry, you usually, most of the time, you want to have a high explosive round that you can use for that. So you put the high explosive round into a building or into a church steeple, or wherever the enemy infantry is hiding, so that you can blow up as many as possible and knock the buildings down. An armor-piercing round made mostly of metal simply won't be as effective at that. You might even just, you know, might have double penetration, have it go in one side and go right out the other, right? But if you want to blow things up, you want high explosive. So if it's a low-velocity round, you can design it with less metal casing. Right? And if you have a high velocity round, you need more metal casing just to hold that round together as it shoots across the battlefield at hundreds of miles per hour. But with a low velocity round, you can put more explosive in because it doesn't need as much metal just to hold it together. Now here's the statistic that will change your mind about this Sherman tank. And that's that 90% of the rounds that were fired by Sherman tanks in World War II were high explosive. 90%. And so when you take a tank like the Sherman and you put it on a battlefield like World of Tanks or War Thunder, where it fights exclusively against enemy vehicles, of course it looks like a miserable design that's a piece of shit and can't compete. But that is not what World War II was. World War II was a complex battlefield with interlocking responsibilities and support between many different kinds of units. And this Sherman with a low velocity 75mm barrel was actually extremely good at what it did, delivering low velocity high explosive rounds into enemy positions and winning the war for the United States in the end. You know, here in War Thunder, for example, its armor penetration on the 75mm low velocity gun is 109mm at 100 meters, 92mm at 500 meters, 76mm at 1,000 meters. Well, yes, of course, there were times when this tank came up against, even in its infantry support role, came up against enemy armor. For instance, Panzer IVs which had superior guns when compared to the 75 millimeter. For instance, the Panzer IV had a 48 caliber 7.5 centimeter KVK 40 or L48, same thing, which was superior to this in terms of armor penetration. And the United States, by the time of Operation Cobra, which was I believe in July of 1944, about a month and a half after the D-Day landings, they had started to deploy the upgunned M4A2, a 76 millimeter Sherman, right? And this is a higher velocity 76 millimeter gun, right? 76 millimeter versus 75 millimeter. Whoop-de-doo, that diameter of 1 millimeter, that 1 millimeter diameter difference is not going to make a big difference. What's making the difference here is the higher velocity that round is coming out of the barrel, and they've achieved that in a few ways, but just one of the ways is to have a higher distance, higher length over which this projectile is having an unequal force acting on it. So this expanding gas is coming out, is pushing it out from behind over a longer distance, leading to higher velocity as it hits this exit point. When it basically, as an approximation, reaches a kind of an equilibrium in terms of forces, although there's a lot more drag. Then drag is like one of the major forces acting on it there, so it's slowing the shot down. So this was deployed starting with Operation Cobra, and between Cobra and the Bulge, the Americans would often assign these upgunned 76 millimeter Sherman tanks in an overwatch role to small units of Sherman 75 millimeter Sherman tanks to make sure that they had some kind of anti-armor capability. Now the Americans, believe me, they weren't idiots, and they're underappreciated for this. And I want people watching this video to understand that they were smarter than most history documentaries let on. The Americans had done a great job, in my opinion, of designing an anti-tank capability, and that was in part seen with its M10. Although this is not an M10, this is the British upgunned Achilles. But this is basically an M10 with a more powerful gun on it. But the M10 was a relatively mobile, decently armed, not heavily armored tank, which was designed to get around the flank of the enemy and put rounds into its side with a very effective gun. And the Americans did it not just with the M10, but they also did it with the legendary, in my opinion now, legendary M18, which I used to hate. I thought it was a piece of crap, again, because I was playing board games which pretended to tactical level World War II board games, which I wish I would have never wasted my time on that, because I feel it doesn't work, because it surrenders the M18's most effective weapon, which is its surprise. And because think about it, in a board game, when your M18 is on the board, the Germans in their Panthers always know where you're at, and they shoot at you. And your M18 is dead because of its miserable armor. But in games like War Thunder and World of Tanks, your weapon is surprise, to get on the enemy's flank and side before they know what the hell's going on. And this tank is so fast that when you get into a close knife fight with a Tiger, you can actually outturn its turret and drive circles around it, and it cannot take you out. This will beat the Tiger in a close knife fight 8 times out of 10. In my opinion. At least that's been my experience. And now it's my favorite tank of World War II, probably the fastest tracked vehicle of all World War II. So the Americans were thinking, and they put this 76 millimeter M1, which is the gun that this is the same gun that they upgunned this Sherman with. So this is how the Americans were thinking. They had an anti-tank capacity. Oh, this is the upgunned Super Hellcat. So they had an upgunned anti-tank capacity, which was speedy and could be deployed on the battlefield relatively quickly and effectively. And they had their infantry support cruiser, which was not designed to break through the enemy lines, but to exploit holes in enemy lines. And I feel that they did a very good job at that. So now this tank, there were about 49,000 units produced of the Sherman tank. It was cheap to produce. It was relatively cheap to produce, between $600,000 and $800,000 in 2017 terms. And again, it's just totally unfair to compare this to a German Panther or German Tiger tank. And it was not extremely likely that they were going to come up against them anyway, because the Germans couldn't produce enough of them. These were much more likely to encounter Stugs or Panzer IVs. And like I said, the Panzer IV was taken care of with this. Upgun Sherman, 76mm upgun Sherman. Now the Brits were thinking ahead of the game as well, and they took this one step further with their famous Firefly, which is a tremendously upgunned Sherman. They took a 3-inch 76mm Ordnance QF-17 pounder and put it into a standard 75mm, or put it into a standard Sherman turret, basically by rotating it 90 degrees. And take a look at the penetration values here. We've got 157 at 100 meters, 133 at 500 meters, 112 at 1,000 meters. So they produced between 2,100 and 2,300 of these. And I'm not sure exactly on the specifics of whether the British provided these in Overwatch roles to their tanks units as well. But the Americans, as I said, they did provide their upgunned 76mm Shermans to their 75mm Sherman units in an Overwatch role. And again, that allowed these 75mm low-velocity Shermans to do their job well, which was support the infantry. And the statistics say it all. If 9 out of 10 of your rounds coming out of the end of that shell are high explosive, this thing is dealing mostly with infantry and soft targets, right? And it's doing exactly what it was supposed to do, and it was designed in a freaking extremely good way to do that. So there you have it. I hope that the designers and the American engineers who put their brain power into this get more credit than the history documentaries give to them, and most historians actually. I feel this was a very interesting and capable vehicle, and when you take it and you drop it into a game like War Thunder or World of Tanks, which is completely ahistorical in that there is absolutely no infantry running around, then of course it looks like a really bad design idea and like a crappy piece of equipment, which it wasn't. So there you have it. I hope I've changed your mind a little bit about the Sherman today, and I hope that you actually enjoy playing it with some of this in mind now, and look at it and its designers and the men who fought in it in a totally different light now. So have a great day. Thanks a lot for stopping in. Bye-bye.